Welcome back to the You Can Too podcast. On today's show, we have Gay Hendricks on the show. After getting his PhD in counseling psychology at Stanford, he is an author of over 40 plus books, teacher in the field of personal growth, relationships, many other. He is an amazing, amazing human. He's the author of The Big Leap, The Genius Zone, so many other things. Gay, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I can't express my gratitude enough.
Well, it's my absolute pleasure. I really love the theme of what you're doing, and I'm always interested to speak and talk and think more about the vast human potential that most of us are using about a tenth of a percent of.
Absolutely. And that's why I'm so excited to jump into this because your work is something that, you've been touching on it for a long time. And I know for me, getting into this space, there was nothing, at least at school, there was nothing that I was aware of that this was even a thing. This knowledge work, this idea of our beliefs, that how they play out in our lives. And I know that there was a moment for you when you were 24 years old when you fell in New Hampshire. And I'd love for you to start there, to kind of get us off onto your journey and how you got into this work.
Thank you. That's a great invitation. Okay, so we're going back now 50 some years to the year of 1969 when I was 24 years old. Now, if you look at me today, I'm obviously 50 years older, but I look completely different. Like I'm about 6 feet tall and I weigh about 180 pounds and I work out 3 days a week at the gym. So I look like a athletic old guy, basically. But if you go back to 1969, I had struggled with obesity pretty much all of my life. There was something wrong with glandularly when I first got born, because by the end of my first year of weight, first year of age, I was extremely overweight. I had kind of rolls of fat on me as a baby. And I continued to struggle with obesity, even though I was the only fat person in a family where everybody else was skinny. And so I was eating the same thing they were eating, so nobody could figure out what the problem was. And actually, the scientific understanding of what was wrong with me didn't come along until later. So they wouldn't have been able to find out anyway, because uh, it was only later determined what the problem was. By then, I'd already cured it myself, because at age 24, I went out for a walk one day. I was 300 pounds. I smoked a couple of packs of Marlboros a day. I wore big, thick glasses. I was in a relationship that I'd been in for a couple of years that had really gone sour, but we couldn't figure out how to break up because we literally didn't have enough money to rent another place. I think I had something like $39 in the bank and my old VW at the time. And so I felt really trapped. And I was also in a very difficult job. I worked at a school for delinquent boys, and I was a teacher there, which partly meant also that I was in charge of one of the dorms. And so 24 delinquents, I had to kind of supervise them all week long and then teach them several hours a day in school, too. So it was a really demanding job. And I got into an argument one afternoon with my then partner, Linda. And to clear my head, I went out for a walk. And it had snowed the day before, and there was a coating of snow over a place where there was a bunch of ice, unbeknownst to me. And I stepped on the snow and hit the ice, and my feet shot out from under me. And wham, I went down on my back. I hit my head. I didn't knock myself out, fortunately. But I don't know if you ever thought about it, but a 300-pound person weighs approximately as much as your refrigerator that you have. And so hitting the ground, it was like shook me out of my normal state of consciousness for about
Yeah.
2 minutes. And I had a most amazing experience. I don't think I'd be here without this experience. What happened was, over these 2 minutes or so that I was lying on the ground, it was like something got turned on, like turning on the lights in a room that had been dark, because I suddenly realized that I have all of these emotions that I never talk about and never even pay attention to. I'm angry, I'm sad, I'm scared. I've got all sorts of different feelings in me that I was completely cut off from. And so that was insight number one. It was like when the lights went on, I realized, wow, there's this world of emotion down in me. And I also realized there was this world of really tense muscles. It was almost like I was holding myself in a state of chronic contraction. What was I contracting from? Well, I think it was contracting from to try to get away from those emotions that I felt because I could feel in this 2 minutes, I became aware of emotions that I'd never known I had. And one of them was I felt a tremendous amount of sorrow and anger at my father, even though I never knew my father in real life. He died while my mother was pregnant with me. And so I just grown up, knowing I had no father. And so I'd cut myself off from a whole bunch of emotions I felt about being the only kid in the neighborhood that didn't have a father and all these feelings of childhood that I'd sealed myself off from. And I realized my smoking cigarettes was also, whenever I'd have one of these emotions come up, I'd either overeat or light a cigarette, and that would make them go away because
Yeah.
then I'd be dealing with the food that I didn't need or the cigarette smoke, which I certainly didn't need. Fortunately, I never cultivated a taste for alcohol. I know other people get in trouble big time with that, but I've frankly never been able to stand more than about half a beer or two swallows of wine in my life. So that was a good break that nature dealt me with a nervous system that didn't respond to alcohol because I probably would have taken that on too. Anyway, so there I am laying on the ice and being aware of all the lights on suddenly in this room that I hadn't seen before. Then here's the real magic. I saw that underneath all of that tension and underneath all of that uh, undealt with emotion, there was this radiant, open, like ocean of pure consciousness
Yeah.
that was just on all the time. It was, the lights were on all the time, but I'd covered it over with all this other stuff. And that was a huge moment for me because I realized, oh, underneath all my programming is this place of being or isness or it's hard to put words on it, but
Yeah.
imagine the sky at night without the stars. It's just this open space. Or imagine the room without anything in it. There's just this open space of pure potential. And human beings have that. And I'd never realized that. And I realized that's the place we need to occupy to redesign our lives because it's underneath all of our programming. So in that 2 minutes, I made this big decision. I could feel the lights beginning to dim, as I was kind of coming back to realizing, oh, I'm laying on a road. It's 20 degrees. I'm shivering. Oh God, I want a cigarette. Oh God, I've got to walk back home to my apartment. I could feel my old personality, 300 pounds of it coming back into focus. But I did this one beautiful thing, and I think I'm here because I did it. And I want to advocate that all of your listeners and viewers do something like this in your own life. I made a commitment to bringing forth that pure consciousness. How I said it in my mind at the time was, I'll do anything it takes. I'll do whatever it takes to feel that pure consciousness in every moment of my life. To feel that radiant, pure, open sky ocean of awareness, even when I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time, but my dream came true because I'm very aware of it as I'm speaking to you. And in fact, I think it's who's doing the talking, not the personality known as Gay Hendricks, because half the time I don't even recognize the stuff that's coming out of my mouth. But I dedicated myself to bringing that forth. And I got up and I went home and I started making and implementing some little specific changes. like I started eating a different way. And I started eating to feed my pure consciousness rather than my old 300-pound body. And I can't remember if I mentioned this in the book, but it's coming to me now that I found some blueberries. And that was the only thing I could find in the freezer or the refrigerator that I could actually, as I tuned into it, it felt like if I ate those blueberries, it wouldn't turn off the light, it would turn up the light. And so I started making my food decisions that way. And sure enough, I think I lived on that. There was this big package of blueberries in the freezer, and I think I lived on those for about 3 days. And I immediately dropped 10 pounds. And then I started eating more other things like fruits and vegetables. And within the first month, I lost 35 pounds rather effortlessly. But then some of your viewers and listeners have read The Big Leap. Then I encountered my first upper limit problem. So let me pause there and take a breath and see if you have any thoughts or questions. So there's my version of what happened 50 years ago that accounts for why I'm here talking to you today.
Your excitement and just energy that you give off still comes off to this day, and it just excites me, and it gives me a model to want to live by for my future. And I just want to express my gratitude for the way that you live your life, and for you sharing so much of your knowledge work and everything that you put in the world. I just want to express my gratitude before I continue. um I love that you bring that perspective in, because I do want to ask you, falling down and bringing that awareness to your programming, how were you aware that it was programming to begin with? Because I feel as though for most of us, we go throughout our lives not knowing that we have these beliefs that clog our judgment, that we don't even know that they're beliefs to begin with.
Well, I think in that 2 minute period of open space, I used an ancient, powerful technology that everybody has access to. And I think I unearthed those old beliefs with pure wonder
Mm,
because as I was laying there on the ice, I was wondering, hmm, my father was a heavy smoker. My father was overweight when he died. My father died at age 32. Wow, I'm repeating his life.
yeah.
I'm on a trajectory to die even earlier. And so that was that awareness. And I think I got there by just wondering, like, why would I be trying to kill myself at age 24? Why would I be smoking heavily? Why would I be 100 pounds overweight? And so to this day, I think wonder is our superpower. And very few of us use it. Like some of the geniuses among us, like Einstein, if you look at, there's a part of his notebooks where he talked about wondering about a particular physics problem every day for 27 years. you know, that's a lot of commitment to wondering.
Yeah.
Just imagine something that you would be fascinated enough by to wonder about it every day. And then finally, 27 years later, oh, I get it. You know, that must have been a great day, by the way, when he finally
Yeah.
figured it out. Or another thing, when Watson and Crick figured out the structure of the DNA molecule, which over the last 75 years has changed our world. Medicines and everything are made because of that,
Yeah.
and they didn't get it in the laboratory, although they had a great laboratory. They got it when they were out walking on the beach. They went out for a break and they were walking on the beach, and suddenly, oh, I see. It's structured like a double helix.
Hmm.
And the other one said, that's it, and they ran back to the lab and kind of built a model of it. But, a lot of these things don't happen when we're sitting there beating our brains out. They happen when they kind of, we give ourselves a little break. And, or another famous example of the German chemist von Kekula, who made the greatest scientific observation of his time in a state of altered consciousness, where the structure of the benzene ring was the thing that the chemists were trying to crack back in the 19th century, and nobody could figure out what it looked like and how to conceptualize it. And he was thinking about it one night in front of the fire, and he dozed off. And when he dozed off, he had a little dream, a little short 10
Yeah.
second dreamlet of a snake eating its own tail. And he realized that was how the benzene ring was actually structured. And one of those little 10-second bits of awareness that then accounted for the German pharmaceutical discoveries of the 19th century, which laid the groundwork for everything today in pharmaceuticals. And so all of these things don't so much depend on us kind of beating our brains out and trying to think our way to things, but in those moments of reflection and wonder where we're kind of taking a break from the ordinary functioning of our minds.
Yeah. I think in the world that we're in today, this idea of hustle culture is something that's really pressed upon us, especially when we're on social media and it's seen it as every day. You're posting every single day. You see so many people doing so many different things. I'm curious, how are you able to I know for me this idea of rushing is something that it has been pushed upon us. It feels as though how do you make space for that wonder, for that time for reflection, for that time for introspection without feeling like you're almost falling behind, if that makes sense?
That's been a real challenge, James. It took me years, actually, a few years, I think. See, I think that what you're talking about ultimately has to do with whether we, as an individual, you, I, our friends, the people who are on this podcast, do we feel like we actually deserve to be here? Do
Yeah.
we feel like we actually deserve to have the good things of life? Because so many of us, I talk about this a lot in the Big Leap,
Mhm.
so many of us have a program inside that says, I don't deserve to be here. I don't deserve to have the good things of life. And because those were things that were projected onto us early on. Somebody looked at us and said, this person doesn't deserve to be here, which is a translation for my life would be better off if I didn't have this kid. And so a lot of us get that, because the statistics are that, 63% of us are unplanned and
Yeah.
40 some percent of us are unwanted. Even though, our parents often do come around and get there for us, oftentimes that's on top of, oh no, why did I get this kid right now? This is changing my life.
Yeah.
That's the circumstances into which I was born, because I'm sure my mother, if she dialed it up, would have much rather said, I'd like to continue being a 33-year-old happy housewife with a husband when I have this baby, rather than, oh, my life is now I'm a widow and I have $300 in the bank.
Yeah.
What do I do? I've got this 7-year old and now I've got a baby. What do I do? Well, those are panicky, terribly difficult things to get through for any of us. And so, down inside of us, we carry those things because, like, for example, I noticed that you're the fourth, and number one, two, and three have an influence on you, but obviously you can go beyond what one, two, or three did because of the great power of the human spirit to reinvent itself. But here's the absolute fact that you and I were already an egg inside our mother when our mother was a fetus inside our grandmother.
Mm.
So we are here 3 generations into the different emotions and different things that were going on. And so if my mother felt panicky before I was born, you can imagine what my little 8-pound nervous system must have felt
Mm.
in there. And so part of life is waking up to our limitations and wondering about how those limitations got there. Did I get there because I was kind of born into a certain way of thinking? And maybe so, maybe not. Did I get here because of some trauma that happened? Like my father dying? Do I have certain number of beliefs about, the scarcity of things down inside,
Yeah.
even though my current life might be a very abundant one? So those are the kind of things that a healthy human being does when you begin to be up in your 20s and 30s, you begin to wonder about how much of your life and what's going on is being dictated by your early programming. In other words, am I on a creative walk through life or am I on a tram that has tracks on it?
Yeah.
That's a good thing to know because most people aren't satisfied with just being on the tram where they get on a certain program and they stay with it. Like the great psychiatrist R.D. Laing once said, most humans will die the way they are born.
Mm.
That, and that's probably true in many ways, that they'll stay in the social class they were born into with that set of beliefs and that kind of thing and live their lives out within that context. And so what I'm after sowing in this world are the seeds of everybody having access to their genius so that we all learn and are taught the power of wonder, the superpower of wonder, how to quit just thinking the same old way and say, how could it be done some other way?
Yeah. That I love that you think this way, and I think for everyone that I've spoken to, whether it's on this podcast or people that I've read their books or anything in this regard, is they're curious and they question things, and that's one thing that I've realized within myself is I'm always questioning things to resonate with you. Is I lost my father at 37, and my grandfather, his father, passed away at 66. So I am the fourth, but every James before me passed away very young as well, and so I am curious, like knowing that there are programmings that we have that we are may not be aware of. How do you identify what programmings are playing out in your life and how you can really not just remove them, but kind of build a better relationship with them, even?
I think you have to look. We have a saying we use in our seminars here called the rule of three.
Mm.
Like if you're walking down the street one day and a brick falls off the building and whams near you, you know, uh, well, if you walk on a street in the city, sometimes bricks fall. But if you're walking down another street on another day and somebody almost drives off the road and collides into you, um, that's two. Well, that's beginning to look like a theme. But if certain things happen a third or a fourth or a fifth time,
Mm.
like I heard on NPR one time, they were interviewing a guy who had been mugged something like 36 times.
Wow.
And, you know, they were studying him to try to figure out, because everybody else in his neighborhood, maybe they'd been mugged once or twice, but this guy, anyway, they figured out that he kind of radiated an aura of victimhood even in the way he walked. They
Mhm.
analyzed his shuffle and they interviewed a bunch of professional muggers and they showed them the videos of different people walking and they said, oh yeah, that's the one I'd mug,
Yeah.
just based on the body language. And so we have to look at the kind of things that repeat several times. If you get rejected by a partner once, well, almost everybody has that. But second time, a third time, a fourth time, a guy came in. I still have a hard time believing this, but when I practiced in Colorado way back, I was a professor there at the University of Colorado in the counseling psychology department from 1974 to 1975. And I also maintain a private practice one day a week. And one of the guys came in and he was in his 30s. And he told me a story. And he said that he had been rejected in 17, I think it was, different relationships since he was a teenager. He'd get into them and then he'd be in them for 6 months, usually was a typical time. And then the woman would just disappear. And this had happened over and over and over and over again. And one day he had this realization that it was a theme. And so he came in for this first session of therapy. And he said the greatest one liner I've ever heard. He told me this story. And then he said, I'm beginning to wonder if it has something to do with me. I mean, what a thing to say, at age 35. But God bless him, because sometimes it takes a while to wake up to something that you've just taken for granted.
Yeah.
Because up until then, the way his belief system held it was, oh, that's women for you, you know.
Yeah.
But when we dug into his background, it's unbelievable to me that he had never put these two things together. But his mother had run off with another man when he was 6 months old and left his father with four boys to raise, of which he was the baby. And so he grew up with this litany of, you can't ever trust women, and women will do that to you. And, because his father never remarried until much later in life. And so here was this atmosphere of distrusting women. And so you can see how that would translate into doing things that would get you rejected over and over again. And I've seen so many examples of that now. I mean, uh, probably thousands by now of that sort of thing. But a sign of a human maturing in their 20s and 30s is they begin to look at the outer circumstances of their life and wonder about, what is it about my programming that's predicting that or causing that over and over again. In developmental psychology, James, we say in your 20s, your job is just to experiment. In your 30s, you find your life. And in your 40s, you build your life.
Hmm.
And what that's really getting at is most of us in our 20s, we're still kind of getting out from under the um, aegis of our parents and try to make our own living and find a place in the world, or go become MDs or lawyers or whatever we end up becoming. And so it's often not a great time for self-reflection, because you're too busy kind of getting things established. In your 30s, oftentimes you begin to look at the antecedents of some of your problems and realize, oh, the enemy is me. It's not my parents. It's what I've imbibed of my parents that's causing me the problem. And get up into your 30s, it gradually sounds tackier and tackier to blame all your problems on circumstances of your
Of
or
course.
your parents or something like that. So gradually you make this move that Katie and I call Hendricks aerobics, where you one day you catch yourself in the middle of pointing your finger out there and going, ha, you caused all my problems. And you go, point your finger back at yourself saying, how is my programming causing this?
Yeah.
And that was so huge for me when I had that 2 minutes on the ice to begin to disassemble all of my programming. And wow, what a task that took to get from that person. But, even in the first year, I lost a little over 100 pounds.
Yeah.
And I also quit wearing glasses. I passed my driver's test for the first time since I was 16 years old without my glasses on. Um, I wended my way slowly out of that relationship and ended up getting my master's and then getting my doctorate. Anyway, everything good, though, that ultimately happened to me, it seems to flow from that moment, because that was like I ran into a wall and said, oh, wait a minute. Maybe the message of running into this wall is I ought to try some other direction rather than going bam, bam, bam.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I've been doing for most of my life up until age 24. But the last 50 some years have been a long experiment in fabulous luck, just one thing after the other going right. Like I wrote a little book when I was 28 years old, when I was on a borrowed typewriter at night at Stanford, when I was, finished with my daily stuff. And the book came kind of a runaway little education bestseller. It sold 60,000 copies, and that was unheard of for an education book. And it was unheard of for me in my starving graduate school life to suddenly start getting royalty checks. Holy smokes. And so that set me on a lifelong belief in taking whatever ideas that I could figure out the solutions to and writing hopefully helpful books about them. The Big Leap, is probably the most famous example of that. But even with Conscious Loving, that was the one Katie and I wrote in 1990 that got us on Oprah for the first time and kind of got out into the world, was a relationship manual. And we've written a bunch of those together. And that's very satisfying work to do. To work together with your mate is one of the
Yeah.
juiciest things on earth. But with The Big Leap, people ask me, how long did it take you to write it? And I say, well, it took me 6 months to a year to write it, but I've been thinking about it for 30 or 40 years. So I was doing my Einstein thing, of thinking and wondering about it and practicing it. Back in the 1980s, probably before you were born, I made a decision to focus more and more of my life on what I call my genius zone, what I most love to do. And so when I realized that first, I was only spending about 10% of my time in my genius zone. And I started systematically every day I would ask myself, could I do a little bit more today of the stuff I most love to do?
Yeah.
And it took me probably about 14 years till I got to the place where I was spending 100% of my time in my genius zone. But by the end of the century, the last century, 1999, I was spending all my time in my genius zone, doing only stuff I most wanted to do. And I can tell you now, after spending, 25 of my years of my life, a third of my life basically, in the genius zone, that there's really nothing quite like it, because all these things come together. The juiciness of doing what you love to do, what you do all day long, even if you weren't getting paid for it. That's what I spend my life doing. And that feels so good. And I want everybody to know how wonderful it feels. The second thing about it, though, is that nature, I believe, nature wants us to keep revealing the genius of ourselves, because we'll keep putting ourselves into one experience after another until we learn the lesson or the message of what needs to come forth. And
Yeah.
if you get the message, you get to live a happy life. It's just like in drama or movies. The message starts to come through, and if the person resists it, they end up in a tragedy. But if at the end of it they say, oh, I see, I was not able to be close to you in our relationship because I hadn't even learned to love myself. Wow, those are the kind of things that romantic comedies are based on, people learning something at the end that they had put off learning. But there's plenty of tragedies in life, where King Lear just doesn't get it and he ends up going blind and, taking himself out. So that's the stuff of life, though, that it works the same way in life. There's a great saying in the Gospel of Thomas, one of the apocryphal gospels of the Bible, apocryphal meaning that they were considered but decided not to use them in the official Bible. But there's some very wonderful stuff. One of them in the Gospel of Thomas says, if you bring forth what is within you will save you. But if you do not bring forth what is within you will destroy you.
Mm-hmm.
And wow, isn't that the truth? I've seen that because I've worked with 20,000 people over the past 50 years. I've seen that with my own eyes a whole bunch of times, where I'm unable to help the person stop drinking, or, they go to Alcoholics Anonymous and that doesn't work. And, they end up going down. And that's a heartbreak in a way, in a big way, for a healer, therapist, coach.
Of course.
They don't tell you that in the fine print when they give you your PhD, but they should say, hey, listen, a certain number of your clients are going to get worse in spite of everything you know how to do. Oh, that would have been a good thing to know, to have a bigger space to contain that in, because, it's just like a friend of mine who's a oncology doctor. He's had to learn how to be with the fact that almost all of his patients are going to die in a certain period of time.
Yeah.
And his job is to help stretch out that time so they have more time with their families. But, if you start getting attached every time, you're going to drive yourself nuts. That's probably the reason people in our professions often have a high burnout rate, that half the people that are in the therapy profession on year one are not in it on year 6 after 5 years. So I think a lot of that has to do with getting too attached to how we want things to be for our clients.
Yeah, you have worked with 20,000 individuals, 8 to 900 business executives, and about 5,000 couples. I'm curious, what are some commonalities that you've seen within all of the people that you've worked with? What are the things that have set people apart, that have set people, that have let people succeed comparative to other people's that have been the people that go back into their old patterns?
Well, what a great question. Let me just reflect on that for a moment. First, I want to say that, like here, when people come um, with marital problems, usually they're very long standing marital problems by the time they get to folks like us.
Yeah.
But we have a kind of a set of triage categories that we've learned by working with 4,500 or whatever it is couples. Some couples are in learning relationships. Most couples are in what we call learning relationships, where their job is to learn something about themselves or the other person, that once they learn it, things go better. Like, for example, many couples, one or the other person is very attached to being right
Hmm.
and making the other person wrong. That's a very common failing among people in relationships. So if that person one day, and I've seen it happen 100 times or more, person one day realized, oh, I see what you're saying. I need to be right all the time. Oh, oh, I see where I learned that for sure. They will have that kind of awareness.
Hmm.
That's a beautiful moment. That's like, for a coach or a therapist, that's like winning the lottery, especially to have that happen in front of you. It doesn't always happen in front of you. Usually it happens when they're out for a walk or something 2 weeks later. But,
Yeah.
to have those moments of awareness, it's because a person has learned the thing they need to learn. So that's what I call a learning relationship. However, some people are in toxic relationships where what they're doing to each other is literally making each other sick as well as unhappy. Like, one sure sign of a toxic relationship is that one or both of the people take more sick days during the course of the year because their unhappiness is being projected onto their physical bodies.
Yeah.
There is an exalted third type of relationship, and we don't see them very often. It's what we call, now we call it a genius relationship. We used to call it a celebratory relationship, but everybody kept mistaking it with celibate. They would say, "What is a celibate relationship?" So it's just a relationship that brings out your genius. It's one you celebrate. That the
Hmm.
main thing that goes on in the relationship is a form of celebration. It may not be shooting off Roman candles, but it may be just savoring the moment.
Yeah.
So Katie and I dedicated ourselves to creating a celebratory relationship 44 years ago. Now, it took us many, many, many years to do it, probably a couple of decades. But for the past 20 or 25 years, we've been in a relationship where nobody's said a cross word to the other person. Nobody's had an argument with anybody else. It's just been entirely supporting, supportive, creative, good vibes, loving intimacy all the time. And that's a delicious way to live. It took a lot of, I don't say work, it took a lot of focus to get
Yeah.
there. But imagine being in a relationship for 25 years where nobody ever criticizes anybody. It just allows unlimited opportunity for personal growth. And so during that period of time, we've written a dozen books together, as well as I've written 20 or so by myself, 20 or 30 by myself. And Katie's written 3 or 4 by herself. So, and that's not all. There's other ways you express your creativity. We have a beautiful, glorious little piece of property here. We have an acre, but it's the most magical acre you've ever seen. We have 1,500 succulent plants on our property, as well as 6 or 7 ancient oak trees, and just everything you might imagine. A beautiful, it's like walking into a garden wonderland. We have people all the time that just cruise by slowly in their cars to look at the stuff we've done for our lawn. So that's another way of creativity expressing itself. That's what we call the genius of relationship, where people get together and spark each other's creativity. So, I got off on this train of thought, James, and I forgot what the original question was. Do you remember back there about 6 centuries ago what the original question was?
Yeah, and the commonality of all of the people that you've worked with, what has
Yeah.
been the thing that stands out most?
Oh, yes. That's why I went off on the tangent. In 3 words, it's openness to learning.
Mhm.
Openness to learning. Take on that. I make a commitment to openness to learning. And not just learning when you're reading a book or something, but learning from life itself.
Yeah.
That life itself is the greatest teacher, because if you just pay attention, there are all these lessons that are continuing to unfold right in front of us. And so just making an intention to learn from every moment of life experience. I've had a chance to work in my consulting career with some of the most amazing people on earth. And the one that just popped into my mind, I always use him as a great example of openness to learning. I worked a lot with, back in the 90s, with Michael Dell and his top 2 other executives, Kevin and Mort at Dell Computer. And it was a time when Dell was explosively growing. The
Yeah.
stock was splitting every couple of months, it seemed. And Michael was already a billionaire by the time I got there. And so my job was, as I saw it, was just to keep the flow going, and keep them having a good time. And, keeping, interestingly enough, people deal with adversity better than they deal with big time success.
Yeah.
You wouldn't think it would be that way, but the reason is because human beings have centuries, millions of years of dealing with adversity, whereas we don't have a lot of time evolutionarily of sitting around saying, wow, man, isn't life great?
Yeah.
Pass me another piece of that woolly mammoth off the fire and let's just sit here and celebrate life. It was just adversity, adversity, adversity. Well, anyway, back to the genius of Michael Dell, bless his heart. Um, he's now 25 years older than when I did a lot of work down there, but it's still paying off because I see interviews with him and that kind of thing from time to time. So he is the fastest openness to learning guy you'd ever want to meet. He crunches, like you hear people crunching the numbers in their heads so quickly, but he crunches the possibilities of whatever you told him so quickly, and he implements it like that.
Mm.
If he sees, okay, it's a better idea to be open to my emotions rather than closed to my emotions. That's a simple example.
Mhm.
But even with that example, for example, it took him about 1/10 of a second. Oh, yeah, I see what you mean. It's better to let on what I'm feeling than it is to hide it inside. thing, make the change, boing, it went into his behavior immediately.
Yeah.
Most people, when you drop a bomb of an insight like that on them, they either fight with you about it. Oh
Yeah.
no, no, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. Um, but many people wake up eventually and say, "Oh, I get it. I've been resisting the idea of X, Y, and Z. Let me lovingly accept that." I really marvel sometimes at the amazing length to which we can keep ourselves stuck, but
Yeah.
I also marvel at the rapidity with which people can get themselves unstuck. I remember a dramatic example, one of three similar instances that's occurred in this particular domain. But a person was brought to me that had lost a good bit of her hearing. And they treated it first as a medical issue and had, hearing aids and the whole bit. And, but fortunately, some of her friends thought it was about something else. And so they ended up bringing her to me. And within a session or so, we uncovered a big sexual trauma that had happened when she was about 12 years old. And she had since sealed that off so big that it affected her hearing somehow.
Wow.
And I've had three examples of people whose hearing was affected by a sexual trauma. So I don't know whether that's a thing that happens or not, but on three occasions I've seen people's hearing come back after we dealt with the sexual trauma. But
Yeah.
what happened in this instance is just this one conversation about it. I didn't see her again, but her friend that had referred her came to me rather excitedly and said, um, did you hear what happened? Her hearing came back. And one of the things in the therapy coaching business and all that is people are very quickly to tell you their sorrows, but they never call you with their triumphs. You never hear. I'll bump into a guy on the street that I saw in therapy 4 years ago, and he'll say, "Oh yeah, I met my dream woman, and I'm now making the $240,000 a year. Thanks a lot, by the way." And he hadn't bothered to contact me in the meantime. But anyway, such is the plight of us in the healing world. So, but on the positive side, we get to see these moments where people come out from under the old programming and breathe the air and see the light for the first time, just like what happened when I had to fall on the white snow to get my awareness. Now we can just get it out of thin air by wondering in ourselves. And we all have that capacity for wonder. And I'm a cheerleader for it. I want everybody to take that power on for themselves.
And I'm right with you. I am right with you there. And something that you spoke about that I say so frequently is that life's going to keep teaching you the same lesson until it's learned. And so until you you want to understand it, until you actually accept it, life's going to keep teaching you the same lesson. And so I'm curious for you, like throughout your life, what has been a lesson that's really taken you a long time to learn?
Oh, beautiful question. One of them is I'm getting more lessons on it since I hurt my leg a couple of months ago on March 20 something. Um, is how to let people take care of
Mm,
me. How to just
receive.
receive people's
Yeah.
deep caring. Because there's this part of me I think has always been do it myself, just do it myself. And I'll tell you, that does not work in my current predicament.
Yeah.
I had to learn, and I could almost feel like peeling off layers of myself,
Yeah.
letting people in, letting people who just wanted to wish me well, or and letting my wife help me, uh, and because I could feel sometimes how I so badly resented hurting myself that I didn't let people in. So that's a huge learning that I got a big dose of over the past couple of months. So that's one, but I think it speaks also to the deeper learning that maybe all of us are in, which is how to let in more positive energy, how to open up and let ourselves
Absolutely.
express and feel more of our genius instead of continuing to recycle the same old stuff
Yeah.
over and over again. I remember that poem by Marianne Moore that says, most of us, I'm probably wildly misquoting it, but
Yeah.
she says, most of us think that life is one thing after the other. Um, and she says, no, it is really the same damn thing over and over.
Yeah.
Because like what R.D. Lang said, many of us will die the same way we were born without ever examining the whole set of things that goes into you being where you are. Well, I'm really glad I did because I'm sitting in my dream house and my dream relationship, doing my dream life. And even though it took a whole bunch of choices to get there, choices to favor my genius, I cannot recommend highly enough that everybody do the same thing because I know it's going to have a beneficial effect on your life.
Knowing that the wonder is such a has had such a big impact on you being able to create that. I think that the quality of our questions determine the quality of our life. And a question that I like to ask guests is if you could have a sticky note on your bedside table and you had to read it every single morning, what question would you put on that sticky note?
Probably would be, am I doing what I most love to do all day long today? Something like that. Or am I bringing forth the absolute peak of my genius in this very moment? So I think the way it is in this moment is the way it is. And our job is to keep refining that until we are we're occupying the very highest, most refined version of our life purpose. My life purpose is to grow every day in love, creativity, and abundance as I go through the world inspiring people to do the same.
Mhm.
That's what I'm up to. I figured that out a long time ago, and I really haven't varied much. So every breath I take is in service of that purpose. So our job, your mission, whether you choose to accept it or not, is that your job is to bring forth your genius and express it in a way that serves the world around you. And it's been my experience that people aren't really happy until they get busy about doing that. So that's the world I want to live in, and I want to keep busy doing that in my own life.
Yeah, I'm in full support of that. Before I started this podcast, I felt really out of alignment with my life, and I felt really pulled to start this. And once I started this, I've never felt more alive in my life. And as I said before we started this, I barely slept last night, just excited to speak with you. And I'm excited to do this every day. And that's when you know you're in your genius zone, is when you feel excited, you feel enthusiastic to go towards those things. And I know, like you said, it's we're doing the same things over and over again. We're reliving, we're re-experiencing the same kind of whether it's our way of being, it's our thoughts, it's our feelings. How can we go from our scarcity mindset, our scarcity feelings, our patterns that don't serve us to more of a life of abundance, the kind of life that you now, it took you a long time to get there, but now you've been experiencing for so long.
It's made one choice at a time. You just have to keep favoring your genius. Like you're obviously in your genius zone as you're doing this podcast, but look back a few years ago. What were you doing back then, if I may ask?
I was probably working in retail. I was in high school. I'm 19 right now.
Uh, and so you were in high school,
Yeah, was
getting
not.
a richly stimulating experience every day, no doubt.
Yeah, definitely not my favorite place to be. That's for sure.
I remember the day I graduated from high school, I was talking to my then girlfriend, Alice, and I said, I think I just felt my hands unclench for the first time in my life. They clenched,
Yeah.
because I spent so much of my school years looking at the clock, waiting for the period to be over.
This question I ask every guest: what belief are you currently unlearning?
What belief am I currently unlearning? Oh, the deep belief that I still cling to in a certain way that I don't believe I belong to be here. I have to apologize for being here. And I see the antecedents of that in my early life, but I still sometimes catch a glimmer of it. I thought I was beyond that until this broken leg happened. And I see still little moments of like almost wanting to apologize to my wife for inconveniencing her. And she was the last person who would ever think
Yeah,
that, but it's a little belief in me. So,
still there.
ah,
I really appreciate your time, Gay. Thank you so much. I'll let you get to your meeting. Thank you immensely for your time.